friends, it's Steph from CheapskateCook.com. Welcome to our farmhouse. We're going to talk about what it's like to move into an 80-year-old farmhouse in the middle of winter without central heat and with really outdated electricity. It's going to be a lot of fun. While we're at it, let's talk about what a bad idea it was to film this video outside in the middle of summer. I'm Steph from CheapskateCook.com and StephanieJenkins.com, and today we're going to really take an in-depth look at Chris's and my farmhouse renovation. So 6 months ago, we moved our family of 5 from our small 2-bedroom townhouse to an even smaller fixer-upper farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. It sits on 5 acres, it's got an old barn, you can see behind me, it's got a bunch of outbuildings, and the house itself needed a lot of work. However, I'm a country girl. I grew up in the middle of nowhere. I grew up on a farm, and so it was really important to me that my kids get that outdoor, nature-y experience where you can just run wild and free, and you can dig holes, and you can throw sticks, and just be a kid. So for our family and the ages of our kids and where we were financially, it was the right time to take this risk, even though it was very calculated and very well planned out. This place had no central heat. It was plumbed for central heat, but the only actual source of heat was an old wood stove that was not properly installed and was unsafely close to walls. We did not feel comfortable using it. The electricity was a fuse box instead of a breaker box. So this was original to the house. There were burn marks on the inside of the door, and it absolutely needed to be replaced first thing. And then one of our special surprises that we got for moving into a fixer-upper, the septic tank totally failed. It totally failed. Before we keep going, if you like hot mess adventures and attempts at debt-free living, hit the like and subscribe button. We bought this fixer-upper knowing that it needed a lot of work and knowing that it was going to be an adventure. Thankfully, we'd been planning for this adventure for a while, so we had worked really hard to save up as much as we could so that we had good buffer when we moved into this house. So you might know our story. We tried really, really hard to live debt-free. We purchased our townhouse after being married for 10 years, completely debt-free, and that rolled over into this farmhouse. So we already owned the farmhouse outright, which meant that all the terrifying and surprising repairs that happened in the next 6 months, we were able to cash flow because we had saved up a buffer. By the way, I am working on our next video, which is all about the cosmetic and indoor decor that we've been able to do in the farmhouse so far. Talking about wall colors and arranging and budget-friendly decorating tips. So if you have any questions about the decorating, designing aspect of our farmhouse renovation, then drop them in the comments and I will gladly answer as many as I can. It would have been so much more stressful if we hadn't planned on this experience being an adventure and being an expensive one. We had to do a whole interior thing, but that is a subject for another video. Today I want to talk about our phase 1 renovation. The phase 1 renovation was all about safety. So in this video, we're going to share the stories and before and after photos and videos of the 3 major safety issues that we had to tackle in our farmhouse: septic tank, central heat, and electricity. And then I want to share with you a really good decision that we made kind of accidentally. It was more of a survival decision, but it ended up being kind of a game changer. When we moved into our house in December, we knew that one of the first things we had to tackle was the heat issue. I don't know if you've ever tried living in an 80-year-old house without insulation in the middle of winter, but it is cold. Even though we live in a place that, we don't live in Michigan or Canada or something like that where it gets really cold in the winter, it still gets cold. We still get snow, we still get ice, we still need to heat our home. We thought that it would be as easy as plopping a propane tank in the backyard. But it turned out in the middle of December, most of the gas companies had a 3-month waiting list before we could get actual gas heat into our house. The wood stove was not an option, even though lots of people on Instagram told me they thought it was the cutest thing. It was not safe. It was not a safe thing. We have a child with asthma, and so wood heat is not a good idea, especially changing his environment and moving into a place that's full of dust and full of all these other triggers. We were not going to trigger him with wood stove heat on top of that. So when it came to the heat, we were cold, but we were never unsafely cold, okay? We bought a couple of heaters, we plugged them in. I was cold all the time. I wore like 4 layers all winter long. The kids sometimes wear winter coats inside, which kind of had me worried, but then other times we've got 3 boys, so they would just take off their shirts and walk around, and I'd be like, aren't you freezing? And they're like, no, I'm good. So they were okay. So central heat had several different stages to it. First, we found out we couldn't drop a propane tank unless we were willing to wait until March. That was not an option because by March it's starting to get warm, so we needed something else. So we looked into natural gas lines, which did not come all the way to our house. So that became a whole thing where we had to go to our county and we had to talk to them, and it ended up working out really, really well because in our particular county where we live, they ended up putting gas lines in right in front of our house because they were planning to extend the gas lines anyway. And then we only had to pay for the gas lines from the road to the back of our house. So that ended up working out really well, except there was a waiting period. So we had heaters for a while. Meanwhile, we had this wood stove in the middle of the house, and even though it was super cute, it monopolized an entire room of the house. We have a really small living room, about the size of a small bedroom, and we have a really small dining room. And the wood stove took up a lot of it. There wasn't really a good place to put a table. It was just a really awkward space. So we decided, even though the wood stove was really cute, it was not in the right location. It wasn't something that we were able to practically use. We decided to go ahead and sell the existing wood stove and use that money to go towards getting the natural gas lines. It was a really sad day. Don't you guys judge me, but we did something today that I'm sad about and also happy about because it knocked out something on our to-do list, but like, it was so sad. After a couple of months of just the heaters and no wood stove, we finally were able to put in natural gas lines. It was a really good decision for a couple of reasons. One, because natural gas lines are a lot prettier than a propane tank. 2, that helps increase the resale value. And lastly, natural gas is a lot less expensive over time than propane is, at least where we live. That was 3 months ago, and honestly, it still feels like magic every time I get to push a button and control the temperature of my house. Can you hear that? Can you hear it? Ooh, so gross looking. That's heat, you guys. 1 week after we got our central heat in, there was a massive ice storm all throughout our area. It covered multiple states. People were without power. People were without water. Like, water lines froze. I mean, it was really scary. And we actually had heat. I don't know what we would have done if we didn't have central heat because it was already so cold. Just with our normal winter weather, to have a freak ice storm like this and not have central heat, I'm just really grateful. One thing that we did during the winter that turned out to be really, really helpful, because we have an old house and it's not insulated, we dripped the water faucets every night. Even on the warmer winter nights, we knew that we just don't know this house as well. We don't know what the water lines are like, and so that's just a tip for you if it's really, really cold and you live in the South where things aren't as insulated as they are probably up north. Let your water faucets drip overnight. It just needs to be a tiny little drip, but it will help prevent your pipes from freezing. While we were trying to deal with the central heat issue, we also knew we had to immediately deal with the fuse box. It was unsafe. There were burn marks on the inside of the door. This house needed a breaker box. And so that was one of the very first things that we did. We had weeks and weeks worth of issues. It was a very complicated project for our electricians, but we were really pleased with the end result. And now we can plug things into our walls without being like, please work, please work, please work. Okay, so when we bought this house, we knew that we would need to do something with the septic tank. And as soon as we moved in and got a look at the septic tank, we knew it was gonna need some work. This was an old school septic tank. So we had a guy come out here and he tried to pump it, but then he called me over as soon as he opened it up and was like, I gotta show you something. And he tapped the wall with his shovel and I watched the whole tank shudder. It was barely holding together. So we had to replace the entire septic tank plus all the field lines the first month that we moved in. That was something that we were not expecting. It cost more than Chris's car, but again, we decided to approach this fixer-upper experience as an adventure. We knew that there would be surprising, expensive things. We just didn't know what exactly they were. And we made sure that we had buffer in our budget so that when this came up, even though it didn't feel good, it was not the end of the world. So now, 6 months after moving in, our 1942 farmhouse has a brand new septic tank and field lines, working central heat and air conditioning, and an updated breaker box instead of a fuse box. None of these before and after photos are cute. It's really hard to show what a big deal it is, but it was a big deal finally being able to relax a little bit in our own house. In the midst of all of this, we did one more thing that was extremely budget friendly, but it was a game changer when it comes to feeling safe in your own fixer-upper. One of the very first things that I did was I made our master bedroom into a safe, comfortable space. When we first moved in, it was the only room with a carpet still that was stained. It was very dirty, it was gross. We didn't even want to put our bed on it. The walls were very patched and they weren't a color that we knew we wanted, and blinds were broken. Moving is stressful enough. Moving into a fixer-upper is stressful enough. I knew that Chris and I needed a place that was clean and we could actually exhale. I couldn't do anything about the fact that the room was cold, but I knew I could control some things. So the day after we moved into the house, I quickly looked on YouTube and figured out how to rip up carpet. There was original hardwood underneath the carpet, so it wasn't that big a deal to pull it up. Oh, funny thing. Okay, so when I looked up how to do this, I saw that you need to have a pry bar. It's not absolutely necessary, but it makes the project a lot easier. We don't have a pry bar. We have these great outbuildings that were full of things left over from the previous owners. And I can't tell you how many times I have thanked the previous owners for leaving so much behind, because I literally walked out to the barn. Within 5 minutes, I found a brand new box of safety glasses and a pry bar. So with those things, I was able to remove the carpet from our bedroom right after we moved in. And then we painted, which, you know, costs about 30 bucks to paint a whole room. And I just painted it a solid white color because I knew with our really small rooms, we were gonna want something that helped reflect the light. So before I completely unpacked the kitchen, before I hung anything up on the walls in the living room, I made sure that our master bedroom was as relaxing as possible so that we could face all the stress of fixing up the rest of the house just a little more rejuvenated. I also ended up buying the very first bed Chris and I have ever owned. We've been married 13 years. We have 3 kids, 2 of them are tweens, and we finally have a bed. Okay, here's what we did right in the last 6 months moving into our fixer-upper. First, we saved extra cash. I can't tell you how many times Chris and I looked at each other and during all of the repairs and we're like, this would be 1,000 times more stressful if we didn't already have some money in the bank earmarked specifically for, oops, now we have to fix this. Second, We approached this move as an adventure, so we had very low expectations moving in. Our house is lovely, we love it, it's full of character, and it was actually really well cared for. There were just a lot of updates that had stacked up over time. But we knew in order to stay debt-free, we had to buy the house that no one else wanted to buy. And I talked about this in the before tour of the farmhouse, like right after we moved in. The things that this house needed were things that we were willing to deal with. We had a couple of things that we were not going to compromise on, and I talked about that in the video, but everything else, in order to stay under budget, had to be flexible. And the house ended up needing just about everything else. The other thing we did was we nerded out and created a spreadsheet. I know you free spirits out there are gonna roll your eyes and be like, ugh, spreadsheet. But seriously, this was a game changer. A couple weeks after we moved in, we just created this little Excel sheet that listed all of the things that we want to do in the house, all the things that we need to do in the house, and then we had columns for resources and contractors and articles for DIY projects, the quotes or the approximate costs for the DIY projects. It's not a fancy spreadsheet, but just the act of writing it all down made it feel like we could actually do it. It was a game changer for our stress levels and for Chris and I coming together on this project and tackling it together. Lastly, we created our safe place. This was so good. We needed a place that was clean and that felt like we could just relax in it. Chris and I are both introverts. We both love our houses. We both love having our safe places, and so this house needed to have one for us. Here are a couple of things that we did wrong or that I wish we had done better when moving into a major fixer-upper. First, we got offended when the other person needed to vent. Moving to the country after living for 13 years in the suburbs and the city was a huge deal. It was a life-changing decision. Even though that was a very positive decision, it was one that we made intentionally. It was stressful. Every couple of weeks, I would just kind of fall apart and just be like, this is not working, I'm cold all the time, we can't even flush toilet paper down the toilet. And then a couple weeks later, Chris was walking circles in the living room going, we had a nice house and now the windows are dirty and the floors are gross and the ceiling's gross and everything's gross. And that hurt each other's feelings. Chris felt like he wasn't taking care of his family well. I felt like, oh my gosh, what did I do? This was my big dream and now Chris is gonna be miserable. We joked about it in between, but during those moments when we needed to vent, we came to the realization that we just needed to let each other blow off some steam and not take it personally. Finally, this was something that we tried to avoid, but we ended up not being able to control. And that was, we had to move into the house before we were able to do any work to it. We knew that we would not be able to do everything before we moved into our farmhouse, but we really wanted to get the heat working and the electricity updated and maybe even paint some walls before we moved in. We didn't know about the septic tank. That was something that needed to be done before we moved in too. But between selling our house and purchasing this one and the move out dates and everything, we ended up needing to move in the afternoon after we closed on the house. So we just moved into a hot mess and we lived in a hot mess for a while. We knew there was a hotel 15 minutes away if things got bad. On the one hand, it was extra stressful needing to move into a house with so much basic work that needed to be done. But on the other hand, it was a really positive experience for our family. It was an adventure. Our kids like to joke about the times when the heat didn't work and about learning, they learned a lot about how electricity works. It ended up being a very positive experience for us and we were all safe and well taken care of. It was just extra stressful, and if there's any way to avoid that in the future, then I will. If you're thinking of buying a fixer-upper or moving your family to the country, I hope that our experience helps give you a heads up, maybe helps give you some ideas of things to check for before you purchase a house, or maybe some perspective if you're living in the middle of a fixer-upper. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button for more farmhouse updates. The next one is going to be the actual before and after of decorating a room. The last 6 months were super not easy, but now that it's summertime and we have working AC and electricity and we can flush the toilet, I just look around and realize this was exactly what we wanted. Back in December, let's try that again. So now we have our farmhouse with a breaker box instead of a fuse box. It has central and it has working central, and it has working, so now, and I talked about this in our last video about the farmhouse. Oh, there's a spider. And I talked about this in our last video about the farmhouse. Oh, there's a spider.